Welcome to the Open Effect. Today, we're going to dive deep into a topic that really matters most for most of us. And we've got an exciting guest for us. Jenna, would you care to introduce our guest for today?
Thank you, Ruby. Today we have Brad, a behavioral change coach focusing on nutrition and fitness. Welcome to the Open Effect, Brad. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jenna, and thanks, Ruby.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you got into it.
Sure. So I probably started my journey a little bit over a decade ago, and I worked in in the advertising industry, and then decided to move out from there. And I started a brick and mortar CrossFit gym, and then working within that for the last 8 years. Fitness is something that we sold there. That was something that we did. We got people moving. But what I quickly realized is that there's so many other pieces of the puzzle that people weren't getting right. And one of them was obviously nutrition. That was one aspect. So people can come and train to the gym, but if they miss the nutrition, that's one aspect that they're missing. But beyond that, there's many other things as well. So over the period of time, I started to shift into kind of the behavior change space where we start focusing on things outside of just nutrition and exercise. So we start looking at their sleep, their stress management, their relationships, so almost like a deep health across the board as opposed to just two little pillars.
Right.
So that's kind of the space that I've been in for the last 4 years.
Okay. What would you say all of the pillars are?
So when you're looking at emotional health, you're looking at your physical health, you're looking at your mental health, existential health, environmental health, and then you look at your relationships as well. So all those things will combine to deep health. So you can have great physical health, but if you haven't got good mental health, then it's going to impact that. You can have great physical health, mental health, but if your relationships aren't in key, that's going to impact those two things as well. So they're very interconnected when you look at them.
And do you find like a lot of people have one or two aspects going well for them, but couldn't figure out why, overall they're struggling?
Absolutely. So, for example, let's say for as a client, in case if someone's got physical health issue, okay, maybe they're obese, maybe they're overweight, but then there's impacts, there's areas within the environment that are impacting them, their ability to change. That's going to make it harder for them to change their physical health, which may lead to impacting their mental health as well. So when you're looking at things, when you're taking a client on hand, it's you need to look at all things in mind as opposed to, okay, well, this is the diet plan you need to follow, go and follow it.
Right.
But there's things outside of his control. He might have a job that's FIFO. He might be doing something that doesn't allow him to kind of create structure within his life. Sure, you could do it. It's just not going to make it a lot harder. And there's other things, other factors within his environment that could also impact it as well. So they're all interconnected, like I said, but one impact can definitely stop the other ones.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you usually tailor to your client, or is there kind of like a common issue you find consistently when people come to you?
No, it's very tailored. It's very tailored. Everyone might have something different. I think we're unique in human beings. We've all got different backgrounds. We've all got different upbringings. We've all got different traumas. We've got things that will impact us in terms of who we are today and how we make our decisions from there.
In terms of your industry, what I want to know what made you want to do what you do now? What was that thing?
That's a good question. I think when I was a kid, I had a car accident. It happened quite early. I was 7 years old, and I fell off a ute and underneath the back wheel. And I think maybe just from my upbringing, I always felt that maybe it was a kind of an internal thing, that maybe health was an important thing within my life. My mom got cancer at quite a young age, within my early kind of teens. I think we were all impacted by issues of health within our families these days. So I think possibly intrinsically, I think that's one thing. And I suppose I'm almost like a helper. I like to help people. I like to make an impact on people. And that's inside me. It's an inherent thing inside of me. So I think that's what kind of steered me in the health and wellness industry. And it's always pulled me back. I've always kind of like pivoted out, and it's always pulled me back. So
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Sorry to hear about your car accident and also about your
Yeah.
mom. And I know whenever we experience something that affects our health, it drives us to want to do something to better it. And in that matter, do you think that there's a link between physical and mental health?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt.
How
Yeah.
so?
Well, I think there's a study that was done by the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and they took it was 120,000 applicants for the study, and what they found out is that there was a correlation between mild symptoms of depression, anxiety, and kind of distress, and how exercise impacted that, and it actually reduced their levels of anxiety, depression, and distress. So it was an overwhelming. But I think mental health is obviously, it's a lot broader and a lot deeper. That there's obviously things that sit behind it. I think it's quite individual. There's biochemical issues as well that can sometimes come up. So I think from an exercise perspective, it can, for people that have got mild symptoms of depression, anxiety, and distress, I think it can help them without a doubt. There's studies regarding that. But I think when it's deeper than that, when there's traumas, then I think in conjunction with kind of therapies and within conjunction with medication, I think it can be very helpful. But then again, it's on an individual basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like, what demographic do you work with in your line of work?
My line of work, demographic wise, I work with a lot of parents. Being a parent myself, I find a lot of people gravitate towards that presence. But I do work with a broad range of people and client base. I think we've all got different unique challenges when it comes to things. So I try and help where I can in terms of the type of individual that I work with.
Do you often find there is a kind of like goal they need to set when they come to you, or like a big game changer you have in mind when someone comes to you and they're like lost, they have no idea, they just know that something needs to change?
It's interesting you say that, and I think people's goals, I think goal setting is one thing, but I think people need to set realistic goals when it comes to things, and set realistic expectations for themselves as well. One of the things is, and this is kind of the phase that people go through, is that when we're looking at goals, or when people coming and looking to make change, they'll go through phases of contemplation. So, you'll get pre-contemplation where they're not quite aware of what the problem is. So they're almost apathetic to their situation or accepting the status quo. We're not even aware that they've actually got a problem.
Yeah.
Then from there, they'll move into contemplation phase, which is essentially where they know they've got a problem, but they're a little bit of ambivalent. They want to change, but they don't really want to change. And then they'll move to next kind of stage, they move to planning, where they start to go, okay, I need to make some change here. And then obviously the next one would be action, where they start to take action on things, and then from there into maintenance. So I think when people are going through setting goals, I think they need to be at the right stage of contemplation when they're setting their goal, because that's going to materialize whether or not they take action on it.
Okay. And what stage do people often come to you?
It's interesting you say that, because like even sometimes people come to me within that kind of contemplation stage.
Yeah.
And I think change is hard. Change is a very hard thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that have come to you, let's say it's a 40-year-old man that comes to me, he's very entrenched in terms of what he's been doing for a very long time. So we often look at a why. So I ask the question of 5 whys, and the 5 whys is essentially like, if someone says to me, I want to change my life, I want to change my habits, I want to try and lose weight, I want to try to stop doing X, Y, and Z, then I ask the question of 5 whys, like why do they want to do it? And then when we dig a little bit deeper, like I want to lose weight, but why do you want to lose weight? I want to lose weight because of, it's going to make me feel better. I'm going to have more energy. I'm going to be more active with my family. And then I say, well, why is that important to you? And then he starts to go, well, listen, my kids are important to me. But why are your kids important to me? Well, because I want to live to see them grow up. I want to see their grandkids and so forth. I want to see my grandkids. And then like when you start to dive a little bit deeper, then you get the real justification as to why they want to do it. And that's, I wouldn't say that's the goal, but that's the reason as to why they want to change. And I think if people if they don't dig deep enough as they want to do it, and I think it applies to many things, whether you're looking to grow a business, whether you're looking to do anything, you got to dig deeper as to why you want to do it in the first place.
It's funny that you say that. I think that's working with like business coaches. They always say, what is your why?
Yeah.
You can't move forward until you know exactly why you want to achieve these things. So I guess that's in every single aspect of your life.
Yeah. It's interesting when it comes to the area that I play in and business coaching. I've worked with business coaches as well. There's a very similar correlation between the two.
Okay.
I've actually worked with another nutrition coach who is a business coach himself.
Okay.
And he made the correlation between the two as well.
Yeah.
Just saying that, he mentors people with nutrition coaching businesses, but he also brings on clients, and there's a very, very similar correlation. There's a lot of the same questions need to be asked in a different way, of course.
How do you get people to take the first step? For example, if it's someone that's come to you and you've noticed they're going through the mental health challenges, but they're wanting to take that first initial step to bettering their physical health, um, how do you take them
From point A to
point Z?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question, actually.
Mm.
I think the most important thing is, and I often use the quote, I'm the guide by their side, not the sage on the stage.
Okay.
And I use that quote because when it comes to helping people or facilitating change with people, you're walking next to them, you're walking with them as a team. So you're collaborating a lot of the time. So it's not a matter of me saying, listen, you need to go and do this. This is what you need to do. Because most people know what they need to be doing. They're just not doing it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that, I think the most important thing is to ask the right questions to individuals. So obviously you need to find out kind of where they're at, where they want to go, what are their struggles down the middle, but then asking crucial questions to them so that they invariably start to make the decisions themselves and they feel part of the change themselves. We all know that when people say, listen, if you train 3 times a week and you eat X, Y, and Z, this is going to give you the best result. Yeah, I know that. But unless you bought into it, then you're not going to do it. So asking the right questions to an individual will give them, you empowering the person to make the decision for themselves as opposed to being like,
you have to do it.
correct.
I mean,
Yeah.
anyone can technically do it.
Yeah.
Like that's with anything. We have Google. We have so much information. People know what they have to do. It's just how do they get to that stage? And do you think? Oh, I mean, over the past decade, do you think there has been a shift with how many people are taking that leap of wanting to change and get into health and fitness based on like culture wise?
Yeah. I think obesity, and I'm just going to use the word obesity, I think it's way more prevalent now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And it's escalating. It's getting more and more and more and more. I think people's lifestyles. I mean, I read it. There was an article in the front of the newspaper the other day that says it's called the cancer generation. This is in front of the cover of the
Really?
advertising.
Cancer?
So they talk about the cancer generation being, at the moment, there's the youngest number of people coming forward with cancer.
Really?
So there's a generation of young
Wow.
people being diagnosed with cancer.
At
And
what age?
no, I'm thinking, under 40.
Wow.
Yeah, so under 40. But one of the things was sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
When they said what it comes down to. So I think, as the world changes, I think we're dealing with different things these days. Accessibility to foods and
Yes.
and so forth.
Well, you've
So
got like sugar addiction, which 100% it is. And then you've also got the media coverage, which it's now healthy to be obese, let's call it. And then you've got the rise of plus size models and influencers. And what's your kind of take on that?
I know a lot of people preach the healthy at every size. I think there's a line to be drawn in the sand in certain aspects, and I think maybe sometimes that line is probably too far ahead. I think you don't have to be super lean and super ripped and super jacked in order for you to be healthy, and in fact, sometimes that can be unhealthy. And I like to say that always go back to the deep health. It's like if you carry a little bit extra weight on your body, it's honestly not the end of the world, because if you've got all the other factors of your deep health in place, then you've got good health.
Yeah.
You've got good relationships, you've got environment, you've got a good job, you've got good existential health, you've got a good vision for yourself and good purpose in your life, relatively good physical health. So I don't think that's too much of an issue. I just think sometimes it becomes a little bit of accepting the status quo, that people get affirmed that it's okay for you to be at a particular way, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy,
Yeah.
because anyone that looks in the mirror that doesn't feel comfortable about themselves, and that's kind of and that's a day-to-day thing, or I think intrinsically people need to feel good about themselves. So I think that comes down to a personal thing as well. And if that's an issue in terms of you moving forward, then I think it needs to be addressed.
Do you think it's really hard in today's society for people to really live that healthy lifestyle when we are so exposed to a lot of, for example, chemicals in our food, and also the false advertisement of foods? For example, if you go to the grocery store, look at anything that's put on the shelf and read the labels, you'll see half of the time they'll say this has no sugar, no added sugar, but in reality, they've used stuff like I think it's fructose or
Oh,
Yeah,
just like
fructose.
yeah,
artificial stuff.
artificial stuff, but it contains sugar, but they're doing false advertisement. And a lot of people are so not aware that they're consuming a lot of things when it's been advertised to them as this is healthy. What's your take on this
Yeah.
false advertisement of items?
But I like to use the phrase, it's the mutton dressed up as a lamb. So I think what often happens is they have healthy food or unhealthy food disguised as healthy food.
Yeah.
And it's like these days, if you look at a lot of the products on the shelf, it all says, with added protein, with added
Yeah.
protein, with added
Yeah.
protein, with
That's
added
the new
protein.
thing now.
That's the new
If you
thing.
say protein,
Yeah.
oh, people are just
It's on.
gonna swipe
It's in
it.
the
Yeah.
waters. It's in the
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh yeah, protein water.
So-
That's just ridiculous. And
So-
people are paying like $80 for like a tub of protein water.
Wow.
It's just crazy.
Yeah. So I think I think a lot of people look for shortcuts when it comes to these things. A lot of shortcuts, and I think there's a lot of. I don't want to even use the word misinformation, but I think there's a lot of marketing that happens out there that's quite dishonest
Oh,
in many aspects,
Yeah.
and I think people are persuaded by that to some degree if they don't look beyond it. And I think it's a matter of taking time. I mean, my wife's worked in teaching for a long time, and she's always shared the photographs of the kids' lunch tins, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's always stuff in there, and I think that shouldn't be in there,
Yeah.
Right.
or too much of it, should I say?
Okay.
And I think it might be a convenience factor in people's lives these days. People reach for the convenience foods. 'Cause it makes life a little
Yeah.
bit easier with the fast-paced world that we live in, and I think that doesn't do any good to our health either. So
Should we then say that a lot of the time, if people are not aware of what they're consuming, how do they start seeking help when in reality half of the time they don't know what is in their food. They don't
Just
know why
trusting.
they don't know why they lack motivation, you know. So how what have you experienced in terms of educating people to know what they're consuming that will help them lead to better mental health?
okay, I hope I understand your question here, but I think for the most part, there's a lot of people that are uninformed with regards to food, and I know there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information. It doesn't take you far to Google or watch a video on. And there's a lot of smart guys out there putting a lot of social media content out there. So I don't think you can be. I've often heard the thing is that you don't have the right not to know with certain things. So there's a lot of information. Like we said a little bit earlier, is that everybody knows what they need to be doing. They're just not doing it. So they might even know what they need to be doing. But in some cases, I've even found where people are like, I'll work with a client and I'm like, they'll give me a food diary as to what they've been eating for the last 5 weeks, for example, or 5 days. And when I look at it, and I'm like, I would have thought they would have known a little bit better than that. But that's okay. It's coming from a non-judgmental perspective. However, I still need to assess and make those evaluations in terms of where they're at. And I sometimes think people will consider a protein source, but they might not be the right protein source. Or they think there's protein in there, but no, there's actually not really a lot of protein in there. Like maybe you eat too much carbohydrates or you eat too little healthy fats. So I think people need to know the ratios in terms of how they eat that stuff. Yeah, it's education. And then and a lot of what I do is a lot of education in terms of what I do, but there's also a lot of coaching that goes behind the scenes as well. So
Amazing.
Is there any kind of food trends? You know, you've got the keto diet, you got veganism, all that. Is there any that you kind of just try and steer people away?
I've always been a little bit of agnostic when it comes to nutrition,
Okay.
meaning that I feel that the world wouldn't be a good place if everyone was a vegetarian.
Yeah.
They still need to mow down parts of land for people to grow that food.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good thing if someone decides to go vegan. It's more meat for us.
Well, she's vegetarian, so when I was like,
Good.
but yeah,
But I think you can solve the equation of your health in many ways. I don't think there's a singular way to do it. And the reason why I say that I've always been a bit of an agnostic is because I'm open for someone to try it. I think for anyone that's got possibly an autoimmune disorder, maybe for a period of time, maybe carnivore or kind of like a meat-based diet would be
Okay.
good for them.
Yeah.
However, I do feel that some vegetables in someone's diet is probably a good thing as well. So you get vitamins and minerals from those things. You get your micronutrients.
Yep.
So I think it's all a matter of finding what works best for the individual.
Okay.
There's obviously certain diets I would say probably that's avoided. I mean, I got asked a question the other day from a student asking whether or not to answer a few questions for them regarding a vegan diet for kids.
Oh.
Yeah, a vegan diet
Okay.
for kids. But there's fact that there is deficiencies if you do that. If you put your child
Yeah.
on a vegan
At
diet,
least let them develop.
there's going to be
Yeah.
deficiencies. Vitamin D, there's zinc, there's calcium, there's lots of things. So they would have to supplement with those things. So I think you always have to take a case in point and it from an individual perspective. If that answers your question.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
I think we're all processing
Yeah.
all that, like when we're talking about diet and like, because I know family members who have had kids and they've raised them on vegetarian diet for all their lives, and they're actually very healthy.
Good.
Yeah, even myself actually, when I was little, I consumed all vegetarian diet. Meat, I've had no love for meat ever since I was young. So, but I've noticed I lacked in iron, for example. So my iron levels are really low. And I have to consume a large sum of, for example, spinach, all the iron efficient food to bring my iron up. So you're right when you say people have to take into consideration what specific food or dietary options they consume, especially when it comes to children, and making sure they're meeting those dietary requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think for any diet, it just needs to make sure that people eat. You become more informed in terms of what you're eating. I think one of the things that you must always try and do is avoid some kind of deficiency regarding of what you're eating.
That's
So
it.
I think if a vegetarian diet works for you, then I think that's amazing.
That's it.
Yeah.
And for me, I noticed my mental health improvement because I've always not been a vegetarian. I've gone and switched on and off. But I notice whenever I am on my vegetarian diet, I notice a big clarity in my thinking, in my energy.
That's great.
Have you had clients who have experienced similar things?
Me myself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've done, I've experimented myself just to see if I provide guidance to someone, I know what I'm putting them on the journey that they're going, if I've done it myself. And I did the vegetarian diet for a good few months, and I felt good. I felt good. So I think you just got to cut it towards what works best for you at the end of the day. It really is. I think that's the key. That's the
Okay.
key.
What do you think about people who do kind of those fasting style diets? So you got intermittent fasting, then you got people who fast for number of days and then they eat. Because I often hear people who say that they get that clarity and they're sharp and focused if they haven't eaten for 2 days. Whereas I'm completely opposite to that. What do you kind of take on people not eating at all?
Yeah, well, I think any kind of intermittent fasting can be a good thing if it's done strategically and for the right reasons, as opposed to doing it for the wrong reasons. Maybe the wrong reasons would be to lose weight, but it's like, I think fasting can be good for that. But I think if you're fasting all the time, probably not a good thing for extended periods of time, or if your calorie restriction is too low, then it's a problem. What I do think, though, is intermittent fasting is not always good if you're highly stressed or if you're in a stressful environment. I think it's good for, they often speak about purging cancer cells with regards to intermittent fasting, long periods of fasting. But again, you've got, when I say strategically, like I always say to people, like, you can use intermittent fasting if you're going away for a weekend, for example. Let's say you've got a big wedding on a Saturday. You can use intermittent fasting there because you're going to go to a wedding. You don't want to be that person that brings your own Tupperware of
Yeah.
chicken and broccoli. So what you can do if you go to the wedding, there might be a little bit of drinking there. There might be a little bit of desserts, whatever. So you can fast for the portion of the morning. So don't
Yep.
eat any breakfast. Maybe eat a small little lunch of protein and vegetables.
Yep.
And then you kind of bank those calories that you would have had for breakfast and you move them to later afternoon.
Yep,
So you'd
I
eat
do
the same
that.
amount. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And strategically, you've probably been
Yeah.
doing it for a long time. You're just
Yeah, I
like,
think so.
I'm going to
When
eat a
you
big meal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I'm going to eat something really good, I'm like, I just won't. I'll
There we
skip
go.
breakfast,
Yeah.
or I think it just balances out.
That's it. That's it.
What about like the juice cleanse, or what is it? The tea detox thing
detox.
that was
Okay.
like really big.
I think there's method behind the madness to some degrees. I think
Yeah.
if you're doing green drinks, I think there's some value to those. But I don't buy into the whole word of detoxing.
Right.
Yeah.
Can't cleanse your liver by.
I think you can do certain things like that
Yeah.
for sure, definitely.
Well, I just want to like shift away from nutrition a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the pandemic. So that was a massive shift for so many people, and the isolation kind of separated. Do you have clients that you were dealing with pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic?
Yeah, it was an interesting shift because we immigrated to Australia at the peak of COVID. So
Okay.
2020 we arrived in Australia. So and I think a week later they closed the borders. So
So
I was
just made it.
was a case study myself.
Yeah.
But I think when we talk about we were all in the same boat, we were to some degree. People, there was lockdowns and so forth. But I think what I noticed is because when I arrived in Australia, I joined a brick and mortar fitness business, and I could see how it impacted people without a doubt. I don't think isolation is good for people. If anything, isolation leads to some kind of addiction with certain things. Obviously, whether it's food addiction or something else. But I think people gained a lot of weight over the pandemic period. Being at home, stuck in their houses, and access to foods in their house and all the rest. And I think there was a little bit of uncertainty. However, when the pandemic ended and people started coming back to the gyms, I think fitness businesses have flourished because I feel like people have come back because of the sense of community, a sense of being part of something. I think although some people have probably found a way that they can probably train at home and they don't need other people around them, I think there's a case in that. I think there's some people that do that.
Yeah.
They just train at home now, So there's been a rise to that, but I think there's definitely something regarding how people have sought out connection over the kind of the COVID period.
Do you think isolation and individualism has increased since the pandemic?
I don't know what it was like before, but I actually
Yeah.
think isolation is not good for nobody.
Yeah.
I think people do. A good friend of mine said that Australia is second on the list to being a very individualistic society. So I wouldn't say that. I'm not going to use the phrase it's all about me or every man for himself. I wouldn't say that, but I think, especially recently we've been going through something at the churches about how men in particular are a little less open to sharing their vulnerabilities with people and being open. Men tend to be a little bit more closed books.
Yeah.
Where women go to the hairdresser and they get their hair cut and they talk to the hairdresser about what's happening in their life or whatever it is, So you can be isolated, but you can still have people around you. So it doesn't mean you're just cooped inside your house. So, and I think sometimes people are isolated. They don't share what's happening in their personal life. Like if I said to you, "How you doing?" you would say, "Yeah, I'm good."
Yeah, exactly right.
So-
No one goes down to the deep,
No.
deep darkest. But then you get people who do overshare, because I worked as a checkout person and I asked questions and then
How good? Yeah.
I think because I was so young, I didn't really know what to respond to them, or like I eventually stopped saying like, "Oh, have a happy Mother's Day or Father's Day or anything about family," because every single time I said it, someone had died, or I'm like, "Oh, okay." But I think people try and steer away from that conversation of trying to get to know people.
I wonder why though.
Everyone's gone more inside, I think. Do you think it's technology or?
I can only speak from my experience. Having gone through a lot of like traumatic experiences and trying also moving away from a different country and coming to a new country and trying to start a new life in a new country, it's very difficult, especially living in Australia. I find that trying to navigate the friendship area, trying to make friends, is very difficult. And I've actually noticed it's actually become more difficult since the pandemic. There was a lot of friction caused with the pandemic in terms of, the whole Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
I lost a lot of friends in that argument. But also it became, I think, of if I'm making friends, how can I be in this friendship? How can I allow myself to express who I am without the fear of, or they can't relate to me. They don't know my stories, my experiences, of what I've experienced growing up in a different country as opposed to here. And especially speaking as a young person, the culture here is very different. So, the culture here is to hang out and to catch up. You have to go to the pub or you have to go to the bar or out party. And then I find that after that, no one's really trying to reach out. No one's really trying to connect after that. And again, people are living very busy lives. That sense of community, everyone is focused on, I have to go to work, I finish late, come back, and then you are left with the weekend where everyone wants to either catch up, and it's to catch up to drink alcohol. That's a big problem as well. I assume you've witnessed this. But yeah, to catch up, drink alcohol, but there's no deep conversation. There's no,
Surface level.
let's go hiking, let's go do this. I feel like we have lost that, and I'm noticing it since the pandemic, since the whole isolation has happened. And to bring up to the issue of alcohol, I am seeing that it's actually saddening. I'm seeing that happening to a lot of people my age. They are now alcoholics. And they look forward to going out only to drink. There's no dancing in the
Yeah,
clubs.
wow.
There's no, and that's another problem again. No one is dancing. I've gone out.
No one dances in the clubs anymore.
Uh,
I
That's all that
definitely
people
do.
did when I was young. in the
Yeah.
clubs.
yeah, that's the thing. And
I
I
haven't
because
been to
clubs
I
are
haven't,
so
I
small,
haven't been to a
though.
club in years, so I don't know what a
Yeah.
club's like inside
No,
anymore.
all the
you-
big clubs in Adelaide have actually
Yeah.
closed. So
Yeah.
it's probably because the venues are so small that if you were to even dance, you're so packed in and it's
Yeah.
like you can't even move.
That's it. But it's also the fact that I think we're experiencing that isolation at a mass scale where you can be out in the clubs and you'll see a lot of young people, and it's either they're on their phone and or they're just
Oh,
drinking,
scroll.
and I play part in this as well, but I often just observe, and I'm telling you, it makes me sad. Um, what what's your experience with your clients in terms of alcohol?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
what I would say to that point is when people go on that health and fitness journey, and I've done this myself, people cut out alcohol. And then that, in sense, is like cutting out socializing because we're so big on that. Do you have clients who come to you who don't want to give up alcohol because it's a social aspect?
Again, if it's unhealthy, then it's probably something you need to address. I think a large part of it, and you just actually hit the nail on the head with that, is that, and I would go back to the deep health, is that social health is a big part of this, right?
Yeah.
And if going out for a couple of glasses of red wine with your mates is part of your social health, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But if you're finishing work every day and you're opening up a bottle of red wine and you're finishing the bottle of red wine, then I think there's something that needs to be
Well, you
addressed.
do have careers that it's more likely that you're going to drink. Let's say like the real estate industry, that those people do drink a lot more than if you're, I don't know, like an accountant or so. Do you then, how do you manage that with, it's like, oh, I can't stop drinking because it's like ingrained in socializing and my corporate role. But again, it could be really unhealthy because I think it does start with one drink here every day. So
That's it.
It can be tricky. And I think, you can have a particular individual whose circle of friends are people that only go to the pub to go and drink. And that's what they do. When they get together, they go to the pub to go and drink. And that's a way of life that's been like it for a very long time. So getting out of that would mean possibly saying, listen, dude, I actually can't come to the pub because I don't want to
Yeah.
drink, if that's the problem.
Yeah.
So, it comes down to an individual thing that maybe they need to reassess their friendship circle.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like,
Yeah.
Sometimes
do you
that,
outgrow
sometimes,
your friends then?
well,
And
it could be, or you just meet your friends somewhere else. Like I like to meet my mates for breakfast and have a coffee with them as opposed to going to the pub. So just changing the environment, and your environment, mental health is a big thing. And sometimes you actually need to change your playground in order for you to make change. If that's something that's getting you in the way from you making change, then that's something that needs to be addressed.
yeah.
What would you say to those young people, for example, in my shoe, that are out there and their only form of connection and socializing is through going to the pubs and drinking? And what advice would you give to them?
It's hard for me to comment because that's what I did when I was young.
Yeah.
I think you eventually
Yeah.
grow out of it. And I
But
think the people
Yeah.
who do the opposite, who are very good in their early their teens and 20s,
Yeah.
I've seen people go, I don't want to say backwards,
Yeah.
but they spend like the second half of their 20s, 30s in that party phase because they didn't experience it quite young. So I'd go experience it young and then
Yeah.
grow out of it.
I think going to those places are part of character building to some degree. I'm not saying you got to go and hang out at pubs in order to develop your character, but I think you make a good point there in terms of that. I think going out when you're young is part and parcel of being a young person. You're developing, your communication skills. Whether it's with the same sex or the opposite sex, that's so these skill sets that you learn when you're doing those things.
Can't write it off completely.
Yeah.
So
Again, if it's a problem, then it needs to be addressed. So,
but yeah, anyway, talking about issues of drinking and all that, I noticed that suicide rates have seemed to be on the rise since the isolation and the pandemic, and particularly with men's suicide.
I think men have a higher rate of suicide than women currently.
it's interesting you say that. I think I got off the call the other day to a guy in the UK. He's a business coach, fitness business coach, and he had just he was quite emotional. And I said, "What's up?" And he says, "No, well, he had just buried one of his friends." He says it's the third one in the past. I couldn't remember the timeline, but he says it's very, very common. It's very prevalent there in the UK, at least where he stays. And I said, "Well, why does he think that is?" And he mentioned a few things regarding it, but I think it is an issue. I think although it's the most weirdest thing is that coming to Australia, there's been a lot of you see it everywhere. You see, I think it's called Blue, Beyond Blue.
Beyond Blue.
So
yes.
there's a lot
that
of
is specifically for men.
that's it.
I'm
So
pretty sure.
there's a lot of organisations here that deal with men's health and men's mental health. In South Africa, I wasn't even aware of it. You come here and mental health is a big thing. It's on billboards and so forth. I think Western cultures tend to have other challenges in life. I think these days we're exposed from a lot of things. So we've obviously got the impact of social media. One of the things that this guy actually mentioned to me is that his thoughts is that we're not meant to have such big networks.
Right.
And it's just
Too
he's just
much.
insinuating on something, but he says people's networks are just too big these days.
Yeah.
So back in the days you used to have your friends that in your town you never had social media. Now your network is like your
Yeah.
LinkedIn profile. I know too many people, so it's like it's overwhelming having
it
all
can
these
be.
connections. So
And
that's
yeah.
one part of it.
Yeah.
But I think there's other things as well.
I can see that because putting into my experience as well, growing up, I got used to having a small circle community. You know everyone in and out. Whereas coming here, having social media, and I started growing a following on my Instagram. It was quite a lot, and I couldn't keep up with that. I felt like it was really impacting the way I felt as a
What
as a
changes your behavior when you have so many followers? Like, because I've
yeah.
worked in social media, I know influencers, and that's why I never buy into it because I know what goes on behind the scenes. Like, I know influencers who batch their content. On one day, they take photos with lots of different outfits for different events, and then
Engineered.
it is. And it's kind of like when people say it's a highlight reel, Yeah, it definitely is. Like people are working overtime to get those images, but it must be so draining because you're looking at yourself as a brand. So then you have to create the perfect outfit, the perfect moment, the perfect caption for these people to know, like, and trust you. But then to have all these people that you're trying to please, like, is that a healthy outlook?
And I'm thinking it's a lot more catered, a lot in the women, like a lot of women are using social media, I reckon, more than men. In terms of, I don't know what the research is, but I think when it comes to topics of suicide, I'm thinking a lot of people who get impacted by social media, could they be a lot of women because they're the massive users of social media, or yeah, I'm not. I'd like to know what are the
Yeah, maybe
statistics
like
on
with
that.
your clientele. I don't know what is it mainly women or men?
It's a bit of both, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of people that come to you because of insecurities they've gotten from social media?
I think these, without a doubt,
Yeah.
there was a documentary that I watched, was an Australian produced documentary. It was called Mirror Mirror. I don't know if you guys saw that. And that was, there's a big correlation between people. I called it the Kardashian effect. And the Kardashian effect is when people see themselves. I think there was a video, I can't remember who did it, but they said that the youth, there's a generation, or the first generation with the flip cameras.
Right.
So it's the first time that they were able to see, like, can you imagine the old,
Look at
like,
themselves. Yeah.
you couldn't really do it, right? So there's the first generation that are able to flip their camera and take their photograph. And I think when I call it the Kardashian effect, is that we find our imperfections. So when we take a photograph, it's like, hold on, my tooth, it's not quite as straight as what I thought it was, So we start to
Overanalyze.
overanalyze, My nose is not quite straight, it's a little bit out, and I've got a good side, I've got a bad side, or whatever it is, So people start to become self-critical when they see themselves so often. Back in the days, you probably,
Oh no.
the only time you saw yourself was when you looked in the mirror.
Yeah. And you know what? The mirror looks good.
I know.
I don't know what the difference is between a mirror and then taking the photo and you're like, oh, okay.
Definitely. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I'd like to know. I'll keep that aside and do research, and maybe we can bring it up and talk about that.
I'm going to bring up something controversial.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to, people's actual health, the COVID vaccine, there has been a lot of debate on both sides. And now, obviously, it's come out that you don't need it and it's causing a lot of health risks. Is that something you've seen in your profession, whether that's the benefits or the negatives?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. I think it's a question that often doesn't get discussed. In the past 4 years that, obviously we had emigrated to Australia during that period, but I think it hasn't been a topic that's been discussed. It never been brought up. You were either on this side of the fence or you're on this side of the fence. And then people would share opposing ideas and probably wouldn't meet in the middle at some stage. But it's proof now that the AstraZeneca vaccine has been pulled off the shelf because it causes an adverse effect of blood clotting. Okay, so that's one. And it doesn't take you a lot to Google the side effects of the Pfizer vaccine, which had pericarditis and myocarditis, which is I think it's the inflammation of like the
heart, isn't it?
correct,
Yeah.
so the membrane around the heart.
Yes. I know someone who actually got it from one vaccine. She took one because she had to for a job, and now she's affected for the rest of her life. But I also hear a lot of stories of young, healthy men in particular having heart attacks and pretty much dropping dead. Have you had any?
I've actually got a few mates of mine, men in particular, that have been diagnosed with AF, which is atrial fibrillation. Whether or not you make the correlation between that and the vaccine, I don't know. But
Doctors
however,
don't.
when you ask the question, have you been vaccinated, it's always a yes. So whether the two correlate, I don't know. It's just, it's more men that I've met. I don't know women, only one in particular. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because, as you get a little bit older, people start having other issues. When you're young, you're probably not discussing, someone in his 40s had a heart attack. But maybe when you get to
Now
40, that's something.
it's even younger. There's athletes now that are dropping dead. There was a fighter. Oh, my brother's going to kill me that I don't know his name. But he used to do blood transfusions to keep himself like pristine. And he had the vaccine, and ever since he had the vaccine, I think he's dead now, but his blood could never be cleaned again.
Yeah, wow.
So I know it's just weird. You're meant to be like, when you're healthy and fit and you do everything right, and they tell you to do the vaccine because it's, you know, going to save you and your family and your community. Shouldn't there be some sort of consequences of how many people have actually lost their life because we were actually forced to have the vaccine? It wasn't a choice, which I think if it's your choice, but people lost their jobs, they couldn't leave their houses, couldn't enter supermarkets, couldn't travel.
And we can even bring up the mental health crisis. I think a lot of it has probably been brought up since that, because we were locked in, you know, and a lot of people experience domestic violence. And I think since then, the peak, it's always been at high peak, but I have a feeling that it just escalated. You know, depression, anxiety, you know, people, especially the elderly. I work with the elderly, and I'm seeing there's a fear that's been put on them that now it's so hard to leave the house and go to anywhere there's people because of the fear that they'll catch COVID. I have seen a lot of clients, they're living in, they're very closed in, isolated, but because of the fear that they will catch COVID.
Maybe they shouldn't watch ABC.
Yeah.
Or even people still wearing the masks.
Yeah.
Isn't that bad? Even worse for your health than, you know, breathing fresh air.
Yeah, so it's caused a lot of damage.
I think so.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear mongering out there.
Definitely.
There's a lot of fear mongering out there.
Definitely.
Do you think there is, I don't know, like an after solution for people who have taken the vaccine and now worry about these ongoing health effects that could happen down the road?
I think the measures you take there would be the same measures you would take if you're just trying to look after yourself in terms of a healthy way. So just make sure you get the right sleep, don't overstress, make sure you exercise, make sure you eat well. So like those things will solve your problems. I mean, I know in some instances some people have gone on to beta blockers or kind of like a blood thinner. So it doesn't create any clots as a precautionary measure.
But then you can't do certain things if you're on blood thinners, isn't that right?
Yeah,
it's like
there's medication.
You couldn't go for surgery.
Because even if you get accidentally, like someone hits you, I feel like I've heard a story where someone was hit in the head by something random, and because he was on blood thinners, he actually died because of like the trauma of that hit. Your
blood doesn't coagulate. I think that's what happens.
Yeah, I have to look more into that.
Yeah. Bringing back to physical health and mental health, for those people who maybe before COVID they were exercising and doing all these physical health stuff to keep them sane, but they feel like they've lost that and they're unable to maybe go to the gym because of the fear of germs or for whatever reason. What advice would you give them to help bring back that motivation to go back and, you know, exercise at the gym?
That's a good question. I think once again, everyone's unique and everyone's an individual. If someone doesn't want to go to the gym, they don't have to go to the gym. They just want to walk, and they walk. So I think the key is to find something that you really enjoy and just do that. Anything that gets you coming back tomorrow is probably the best thing that you can do. Motivation is an interesting thing because it's a little bit fleeting. Because you can get motivated by watching an Instagram video and then it's gone. So it's motivation precedes action. So when you start doing things, you probably feel a little bit motivated that you're doing something, and that doesn't take much. Like if you want to get motivated just to start exercising, put a pair of shoes on and go for a walk, and then you'll probably feel better after that. So that's kind of the first step.
Or even like book a class. I find like when I get out of my motivated phase, I have to book a class that forces me to go. Because then they will charge me fees or something.
There we go. Skin in the game.
Exactly. Like if I know I'm going to pay like $25 because I didn't rock up to that class, I'm going to rock up to that class. So whether that's, I guess, your accountability partner really. So if they're paying for your services, they have someone who is like, all right, you're wasting your money. Get up, let's do something. Let's try different methods. Is that something you actually do as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, without a
Okay.
doubt.
Mm.
Again, everyone's different. So
Yeah.
like sometimes you just need to approach it differently
Oh,
for each individual.
Exactly right. Not
Um,
everyone's going to love weightlifting every
No.
single day, and
No.
nor should everyone want to weightlift.
No.
But there's lots of different ways of exercising. I think there was a rise in like bodybuilding and fitness models.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. I think as I was coming out of high school, I was obsessed with that kind of industry.
FBBC.
Yeah.
IBB,
All that. And
BBA.
everyone was like, tiny. But again, that is on the other unhealthy scale, isn't it?
It can be healthy.
Yeah.
It can be healthy.
Okay.
I think there's degrees of that. I think if it becomes too extreme, I think then there's a problem. But I think if that's something that keeps you showing up, I mean, people that go to the gym and train regularly,
Yeah.
they're pretty disciplined.
Yes.
And if they can use those skills in other parts of their life, then that's a good thing.
What role does community support play in long-term behavior change?
It's a great question. I think it's a massive thing. It's huge. It's one part of the thing. So that's kind of like your environmental health.
Yeah.
And when you look at your environmental health, there's kind of layers of environmental health. So your layer would be, your own body for one, within reach of you.
Yeah.
Then you get, as you go broader, you go into your own neighborhood, and then you go into your community, then you go into the world. All those aspects of your environment will impact how you feel. If you always doom scrolling on the internet, then you're probably going to have poor mental health, in terms of seeing all the stuff that's happening around the world. But from a community aspect point of view, I think it's crucial. I think it's fundamentally important. And whether your community is a community of faith or a community within a gym, where you've got people around you, people that have shared values, and I think that's a crucial point in terms of long-term behavioral change, as you say, making sure that you're hanging around with like-minded people that support your goals and that you can share this journey with. I think it's very important.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people who are looking for a change? What should their next step be?
There's a question I always ask people, and the question is, are you ready, willing, and able? All right. And if you don't answer yes to all of those, then you do nothing. Yeah. No, but that's a good litmus test. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll follow up with, how committed are you to change based on a scale of 9 to 10? And that needs to be 9 to 10.
Yep.
And if it's not, then we need to understand why. Like I said a bit earlier, it's like it really just needs to take the first step. But I think the key to taking the first step is finding out what's the most important thing to focus on first. And I think that's what people miss, is that people try and do too many things at once. And then if they fail at that, then there's a sense of failure. And then it's like, oh, I can't do this. But if you take the long road, if you're willing to say, listen, in a year's time, I'm going to be a different individual and I'm going to change. So you've got to have identity change as opposed to just surface level change. So you've got to change inside. So if you're someone that has lots of bad behaviors or you do X, Y, and Z, you've got to change internally. Who is the person I need to become in order for me to create this change in myself? So I know it sounds a little bit deeper than what it should be, but it's something that one
we
needs
got to
to
work
consider.
on ourselves, guys. That's the answer.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
If you'd
Thank
like to tell our audience where they can find you, how they can work with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm found on all the kind of major social media platforms, Brad Stratum, and then on my website, bradstratum.com.au, and everything is there. So working from a one-to-one consultation basis or ongoing. So that's me.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
thank you so
Beautiful.
much.
Thank you so much for joining us today and to discuss these, topics that we really need to implement in our lives. And I hope everyone that's been watching or listening will get a chance to unpack what Brad has said today and implement that in your daily lives as well.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
lot more we can dive into. So
For sure.
we'll have to bring it back. It's such a broad
Yeah.
Yeah.
topic.
No, thank you very much, ladies. Thanks, Ruby, and thanks,
you.
Jenna.